False summit? What is this all about? A little personal experience here as we launch into current events today in the context of Bible prophecy. I've had the privilege 2 times to summit Mount Whitney. It is the highest peak in the contiguous 48 states of our continent. This particular view is from the east looking west. Most people will climb Whitney as a day hike, starting at the trailhead known as Whitney Portal and summit in the same day and come down, or perhaps they'll spend a night or two at what's called is base camp. I, on the other hand, because these have always been experiences in which they have been a part of backpacking, have come in from the west side, which would be the back side of what you're looking at on the slide. The day before we have summited Whitney, we stay at Guitar Lake. It's named Guitar Lake because you can see it somewhat resembles the shape of a guitar. It is a beautiful spot. Beautiful scenery looking west from Guitar Lake. And when we arrive at Guitar Lake, we try to get to Guitar Lake by about 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon because we want to just chill for the rest of that day, to rest and just enjoy the scenery. We cannot see the summit of Whitney from Guitar Lake. There are other peaks that are high enough that they block the view of Whitney itself. The first time that we had the experience of doing this was in 2010. Family was with me, both Sharon and Lexi. Had a little bit of footrest there, and you can see the tent that Lexi's peering out. Now, in association with Whitney, you don't go right to the peak. The trail actually takes you to a portion called Trail Crest. And there's a junction at Trail Crest. Trail Crest is at about 13,600 feet. And you think you're at the top, but no, you're not at the top. Because there is another 1.9 miles from the junction at Trail Crest to go to Whitney itself. This is where we begin to understand the term false summit. So you're at a summit at Trail Crest, but you're not completed with what you set out to do. Trail Crest is at 13,600. Whitney actually is at 14,495. So there's about an additional 900 feet in climbing from Trail Crest to the peak Whitney itself. False summit is a term that is used by hikers and backpackers when you think you're at the top, but you're really not. You think you're at the top, but you're really, so it's a false summit. It is indeed a joyful experience to go, well, joyful for me. Others may not enjoy that, but I really enjoy it, being at the summit of Whitney, 14,496 feet above sea level. And on July 31, 2010, we started from Guitar Lake at about midnight and hiked up the western ascent there in the dark so that we actually arrived at the summit of Whitney at sunrise. It was awesome. And those of you who know me know that I don't use that word very carelessly. I only use the word awesome for those experiences that are indeed awesome. And that's a group picture silhouetted against the eastern sunrise as it comes up. Being atop Whitney is kind of like being an airliner. And you look down and the clouds are down there. Well, I had the privilege once again in 2019 with another group, smaller group than the first one in 2010, summiting Whitney. But what is Whitney, 14,495 feet, compared to Mount Kilimanjaro, which a friend of mine has climbed a number of years ago? And my brother is planning to climb it in January? Can anybody say jealous? Josh Adongo is trying to talk me into going to Africa and including Kilimanjaro. False summit. You think you're at the top, but you're not. There's more ascent. There's more ground to cover. Actually, serious backpackers and serious mountain climbers, false summit is not just an inconsequential thing. If you don't know the trail. There's an expectation, excitement builds. Oh no, this is not the top. I've got to keep going. There are some emotional experiences that can come into play. Now, I love the Blue Ridge Mountains. You know I love mountains, but really, the Eastern Mountains are kind of like baby mountains. They're not the big mountains that we have in the western part of our continent, nor are they big mountains such as the Andes in South America. Actually, when you think about some of our Christian hymns that you know quite well, if you've been around the church for any length of time, there is a hiking, marching theme in some of our hymns. Higher ground. I want to scale the utmost height and catch a gleam of glory bright. But still I pray till heaven I found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up, and I shall stand by faith on heaven's tableland. There's a hiking theme in that particular hymn. Can you think of another? If you know it, blurt it out. We're marching to Zion, right? Come we that love the Lord, then let our songs abound and every tear be dry. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground. We're marching upward to Zion, that beautiful city of God. Hiking, marching theme in some of our Christian hymnody. Now, when we think about this and frame it within Bible prophecy and current events, we remind ourselves from Matthew 24 that Jesus spoke of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. But then Jesus frames that, see that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. False summit, but the end is not yet. Now, we today, in our position of time, 2,000 years from Jesus' utterance of this prophecy, also have in our thinking Revelation. And we don't have time to give adequate, detailed explanation. Most of you know what I'm going to be referring to, but some of you may go, I'm not quite sure I follow that. But we see in Revelation 13 a fulfillment that has taken place throughout time, a historical fulfillment as it relates to the two symbolic beasts in Revelation 13, the sea beast and the land beast. And when you read Revelation 13, all the world marveled and follows the sea beast who received the deadly wound, but now it's healed. And then arises the land beast in the second half of Revelation 13. It looks like a lamb, but it actually speaks like a dragon. It causes all to worship the sea beast, employing a restriction economically, no buying, no selling. There's even the threat of death. Now, as we have interpreted this, we apply an understanding to the sea beast as representing the papal authority, and the United States is identified through the symbolism of the land beast. Now, those are the bottom line conclusions. We don't have time at this moment to go into all of the historical data to substantiate that. But this is a very well-known position of our understanding of prophecy. Throughout time, there have been false summit-like experiences as we have attempted to understand current events. Now, we know from Revelation 13 and 14 that the issue at the very end of time is going to be worship. Following chapter 13 of Revelation is chapter 14. And the angelic message, the appeal is provided: fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come, and worship Him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. We interpret that message as referring to Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 and following, which provide us with the Sabbath commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For in 6 days the Lord created. And so we see the final events as outlined in Revelation 13 and 14, focusing around the issue of worship. And periodically, as we see things occurring in the world, we think we're getting really close. We're almost to the top. We're ascending new heights. But then a few weeks, months, a year or two go by, and you go, Fall Summit wasn't quite as close as we thought it was. Are you tracking with what I'm saying? Okay, thank you. I'm just glad I'm not out on a trail somewhere by myself, disconnected with the rest of my backpacking party, which has happened from time to time. So, some false summits in the last few decades. Y2K, the transition from 1999 to 2000. Those of you who were adults at that time may remember that there was quite a bit of hype around Y2K. Computers were going to stop working, planes would go awry, there would just be all this chaos. Well, there may have been a minimal amount of chaos, but there really wasn't that much. About that same time, late 90s, early 2000s, there was a very prominent voice in the Adventist community at that time who was really advocating what's known as the millennial Sabbath, because the earth is about 6,000 years old, and according to Peter, a day is as 1,000 years, really put forth the idea that Jesus was going to be coming early in the 2000s because we are entering the millennial Sabbath, the seventh millennium. Anybody of you recall some of those emphases? Now, I commend the motivation on that. I think the biblical understanding, now with time, may have been a little bit less than accurate. Okay? Recently, only 8 years ago, the Pope visited the United States, spoke at Congress, and we kind of got ramped up again. This is a combination of what we see taking place. It matches Revelation 13 and 14, and I agree. It did. It really, really did. But then it kind of died off. The Pope went back to Rome, and things kind of flattened out and leveled out. False summit? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm just going to let it hang. Remember, though, every false summit, you are closer to the top, right? Well, also in 2015, the Pope put out an encyclical called Laudato Si, which is translated from Latin, praise be, and implied praise be to the Lord. And it was a document with the subtitle of Care for Our Common Home, and it was about caring for planet Earth and climate concerns. From Laudato Si, some have offered this general assessment, that it critiques consumerism and irresponsible development. It laments environmental degradation and global warming, and calls all people of the world to take swift and unified action. And buried within that document, Laudato Si, there were some comments and positions taken in regard to Sunday. In section 237, and I think we've shared this a number of years before, but it's been a while. In section 237 of Laudato Si, we read this: on Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, now I got to pause there for just a moment, because bless his heart, that's not an accurate biblical understanding. The Sabbath did not originate with the Jews. It originated in where? The Garden of Eden. And Jesus said in Mark chapter 2, the Sabbath was made for man, not just for Abraham, but for man. So a little correction there. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, and with others, and with the world. Well, the idea of Sabbath is there, just kind of got the wrong day. It also proclaims man's eternal rest in God. In this way, Christian spirituality incorporates the value of relaxation and festivity. We tend to demean contemplative rest as something unproductive and unnecessary. But this is to do away with the very thing which is most important about our work: its meaning. Rest opens our eyes to the larger picture and gives us renewed sensitivity to the rights of others. And so the day of rest, centered on the Eucharist, sheds its light on the whole week and motivates us to greater concern for nature and the poor. Well, to have a concern for nature and the poor is good. But we don't find that the idea of Sabbath, in its most fundamental, foundational understanding, centers on the Eucharist. And by the way, just a little bit of reminder what the Eucharist is. It is the partaking equivalent of what we do with the Lord's Supper, except there's a vast difference in Catholic thought and teaching. In the Eucharist, the priest mysteriously transubstantiates the wafer and the cup, believed to be now the actual body and blood of Jesus. And this is entirely foreign to New Testament thought. It is a creation that has come about from other sources, not from Scripture. So you can see that in the context of care for our common home, our planet Earth, there is an emphasis upon valuing Sunday. Sunday as a day of rest. Now, I know that many of you are familiar with this, just a couple of quotations from other Catholic sources as it relates to Sunday. The Catholic Record of London, Ontario had this to say, about 100 years ago now: Sunday is our mark of authority. The church is above the Bible, and this transference of Sabbath observance is proof of that fact. Very interesting term that is chosen there. Sunday is our mark of authority. Another Catholic voice from some years ago, James Cardinal Gibbons: is not every Christian obliged to sanctify Sunday? First of all, we don't sanctify anything. We recognize something that God has sanctified. Is not every Christian obliged to sanctify Sunday, to abstain on that day from unnecessary servile work? Is not the observance of this law among the most prominent of our sacred duties? But you may read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and you will not find a single line authorizing the sanctification of Sunday. The Scriptures enforce the religious observance of Saturday, a day which we never sanctify. So you can certainly see that there is this sense of autonomous authority. It says here, but no. We're not going to pay attention to that. We're going to do something that we think is legitimate. So, Laudato Si, 2015, care for our common home, the emphasis of Sunday and the Eucharist as a vital part of caring for our common home. Now, there are quite a few voices on the internet that comment on Laudato Si from 2015. Here's just one, a statement taken from United Nations, their climate change page. In a papal encyclical letter called Laudato Si, Pope Francis declared that the science of climate change is clear and that the Catholic Church views climate change as a moral issue that must be addressed in order to protect the earth and everyone in it. It is a moral issue. Now we are entering the realm of good and evil, of sin and not sin. Continuing on, the Pope's encyclical, along with mobilization by many other faith groups across the globe, provided a clear moral imperative for taking climate action, supporting the Paris Climate Change Agreement and backing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we've talked about some of those in the past as well. So that is 2015 Laudato Si. Do you know what came out this past week, Thursday? Anybody? No? Yes? Another encyclical from Pope Francis, Laudate Deum. Praise God. This is just this week, Thursday, it was released. From Vatican News, Laudato Deum is a firm call for action for creation. This new document intended to update his encyclical letter, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. So this is like Laudato Si 2.0. It's an emphasis. Reuters had this to say about it. Headline, climate change and its human causes cannot be denied, papal document says. Pope Francis on Wednesday appealed to climate change deniers and foot-dragging politicians to have a change of heart, saying they cannot gloss over its human causes or deride scientific facts, while the planet may be nearing a breaking point. The 7,000-word document called Laudato Deum, Praise God, is a follow-up to his 2015 encyclical. It was prompted by extreme weather events since then, which he called the earth's cries of protest. Now, that we're having extreme weather events is undeniable. It's true. It's reality. But actually, Jesus kind of talked about this happening in his prophecy from Matthew 24. He talked about the fact that there will be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. And in Luke 21, that gospel writer adds a little bit more commentary that we don't find in Matthew and Mark. There will be distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Now, in Laudato Deum, we find some interesting observations as it relates to the global community and where the Pope is placing his appeal. Section 34 of this document that just was released this past week. For there to be solid and lasting advances, I would insist that preference be given to multilateral agreements between states. What does that mean? Multilateral agreements. that there be agreements between nations as it relates to strategies with climate change and to reduce the perceived climate change. It will be more effective for world organizations equipped with the power to provide for the global common good, the elimination of hunger and poverty, and the sure defense of fundamental human rights. The issue is that they must be endowed with real authority. These multilateral agreements must be endowed with real authority in such a way as to provide for the attainment of certain essential goals. What are certain essential goals? Not laid out, at least in this paragraph. In this way, there would come about a multilateralism that is not dependent upon changing political conditions or interests of a certain few and possess a stable efficacy. Well, to interpret that briefly, it doesn't matter whether there's a conservative or a liberal in the White House. It doesn't matter in our particular political context if the Congress is controlled by the left or the right, because there will already be a baseline understanding of what we are to do. This is what the Pope is advocating. So I said this a number of months ago about the future, and the future is now here. That the issue of climate will continue to be an ongoing item of current events and has a factor in prophecy as it relates to what we have been talking about. So we have movements, organizations, the Green Sabbath Project, Green Sunday, Climate Sunday. The whole climate issue will continue to be an issue and plays into the prophetic scenario. Now, interestingly, in the book Great Controversy, we see some more detailed comments that are reflective of what we find from Jesus in Matthew chapter 24. The Great Controversy speaks in these words: "In accidents and calamities by sea and by land, in great conflagrations, in fierce tornadoes and terrific hailstorms, in tempests, floods, and cyclones, tidal waves and earthquakes, in every place and in 1,000 forms, Satan is exercising his power." So, is it climate change? Or is it Satan exercising his power? Or maybe it's a combination. "He sweeps away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence." COVID. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. Destruction will be upon both man and beast. Now, the Great Controversy then follows with this scriptural foundation from Isaiah 24. "The earth mourneth and fadeth away, the haughty people do languish. The earth also is defiled of the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant." So, from this perspective, all the chaos that we see taking place around us is because the human family has ignored Scripture. Great Controversy continues. "The great deceiver will persuade men that those who serve God are causing these evils. The class that have provoked the displeasure of heaven will charge all their troubles upon those whose obedience to God's commandments is a perpetual reproof to transgressors. It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced." Okay, we're climbing up the mountain. We're climbing up the mountain. We're getting higher. We see a peak, but we haven't seen this peak yet, right? That those who present the claims of the fourth commandment, thus are destroying reverence for Sunday, are troublers of the people, preventing their restoration to divine favor and temporal prosperity. I don't like you because you're not complying because it's making my electric bill go higher. Or it's causing me to have to spend more money on whatever, my temporal well-being. Now, we've had false summits in the past, but every false summit gets you closer to the actual top, the real top. Now, this is amazing, what I'm going to share with you next. I didn't know that this was even out there until just a couple of days ago. The website AdventistToday.org has a kind of a question and answer feature. We might compare it to, well, this is like a blast from the past from a few decades ago, Ann Landers or Dear Abby or, Ask the Pastor or whatever. Ann Landers and Dear Abby were not pastors, but, So there's a question asked on Adventist Today. And by the way, those of you who are not aware, this is not a denominationally affiliated website. It's by an independent group of people that may not have any significance at all once I go through this conversation. So in this question and answer section of AdventistToday.org, the question is asked, Dear Aunt Sevy. Now, Aunt Sevy is not a real person. I don't know why they chose the name Sevy, but it's just a fictional name. Dear Aunt Sevy, where I come from, Adventist pastors seem to be preaching about Sunday law in both church services and evangelistic meetings. I always wonder why they preach about this. We have no Sunday laws here. No verse from Genesis to Revelation mentions the phrase Sunday law. Why do they emphasize this so much? I don't see it. So, here's Aunt Sevy's response. The Bible records that early Christians did suffer persecution because the Roman Empire looked unfavorably on foreign religious movements. The Bible also correctly warned that future Christians would meet opposition for their beliefs, just as Jesus did himself, and of course, many have and still do. But the notion that the Seventh-day Adventists will be singled out for persecution by keeping Sabbath because Sunday laws have made it illegal to go to church on Saturday is an invention of Ellen White in particular, her book, The Great Controversy. Are you tracking with what this is saying? While Auntie loves the Sabbath and finds it of great value to her life, she agrees with church leader and writer Reindeer Brunsma. Now, a lot of you don't know who Reindeer Brunsma is. He spent most of his ministry in the European area. I think maybe some in Australia as well. But when the answer here says, I like what Reindeer Brunsma says, there's a hyperlink there to take you back to an article on the same website featuring what Reindeer Brunsma wrote. Are you following? Okay? So, back in 2018, Reindeer Brunsma, retired Seventh-day Adventist administrator, commented with this. The expectation that in the end of time a universal Sunday law will be enforced by the civil authorities upon the insistence of the public and at the demand of the apostate churches seems to be more and more unrealistic. In reality, the overall trend is toward less rather than more strict Sunday keeping. In the Western world, the Sunday of church worship is rapidly being replaced by a Sunday of amusement and shopping. Okay, is that a false summit? Now, that was in 2018, right? Wasn't life good in 2018? I mean, just minor issues going on. But then what happened in 2020? The pandemic occurred. And we were told that the virus originated at a wet market. You remember that, right? And a few said, well, what about that lab there? You know, oh, no possibility that could even remotely be in the picture. Not at all. Well, you've probably heard this already. The narrative has flipped, right? Fox News, March 4, 2023, these Biden administration agencies have admitted COVID lab leak is possible. Federal agencies are admitting that the COVID-19 virus may have originated from a Chinese lab leak despite outrage at the start of the pandemic that dismissed the lab leak theory as a conspiracy. So now you can talk about it. The so-called lab leak theory suggesting COVID came from an accidental lab leak at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in Wuhan, China, was widely dismissed as misinformation by Democrats, major news outlets, scientists, and social media companies in the early stages of the pandemic. Now, those of you who lean, okay, that's your left, okay. Those of you who leaned, hold on. We're going to give equal time, okay? The FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident in Wuhan. And there are similar comments from the Department of Energy and a few other government agencies. I can't remember their alphabet names, but there's multiple. And some of you are probably already aware of this. And yet, in those early months and at the height of COVID, skate parks got filled with sand because if you're in there, you might transmit the virus, to someone else who's skating. Arrests were made at churches because people wanted to sing and worship. I don't think it's any threat anymore to say that it was likely a plan-demic, not necessarily a pan-demic, because with time, the truth has come out. We're shifting gears here. Enter Project 2025. How many of you have heard of Project 2025? A couple of you have. Okay, I said we're going to give equal time. Those of you who lean right, buckle your seatbelt. MSNBC. The Rights Project 2025 wants to make faith the government's job. A well-funded coalition wants to put the Bible ahead of the Constitution. A coalition of far-right groups led by the Heritage Foundation is planning for the next Republican administration. So when you go to the website, Project 2025, this is what you'll find. Bold headline, building now for a conservative victory through policy, personnel, and training. Project 2025 is made up of a broad coalition of conservative organizations that have come together to ensure a successful administration begins in January of 2025. Now, this is contingent on the fact that a conservative would win the presidential election in 2024. The project would build on 4 pillars that will collectively pave the way for an effective conservative administration. Those 4 pillars: a policy agenda, personnel, training, and a 180-day playbook. The Heritage Foundation is joined by more than 70 organizations, partner organizations, in this effort to ensure that the transition team is ready on day one. It is not enough for conservatives to win elections if we are going to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left. We need both a governing agenda and the right people in place ready to carry this agenda out on day one of the next conservative administration. Now, the plans are revealed in a 900-page document titled Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. A product of more than 400 scholars and policy experts. Contributors include elected officials, world-renowned economists, and veterans from 4 presidential administrations. This is an agenda prepared by and for conservatives who will be ready on day one of the next administration to save our country. This is just taken right off their website. The Heritage Foundation is once again facilitating this work, but as are dozens of partners and hundreds of authors will attest, this book is the work of the entire conservative movement. So, the Conservative Promise represents the best effort of the conservative movement in 2023 and the next conservative president's last opportunity to save our republic. Now, do you remember what was described as coming from the Pope's encyclical, Laudato Deum? We are nearing the breaking point. So there's this sense of urgency, sense of criticalness from both poles of the spectrum. The Mandate for Leadership has 5 sections to it: taking the reins of government, the common defense, the general welfare, the economy, and independent regulatory agencies. We're going to look at some specific paragraphs within the general welfare. Chapter 18, the Department of Labor and related agencies. Here's what you'll find in chapter 18 of this document. At the heart of the conservative promise is the resolve to reclaim the role of each American worker as the protagonist in his or her own life and to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life. I was going to say something, but I'll let it go. The role that labor plays in that promise is twofold. Give workers the support they need for rewarding, well-paying, and self-driven careers, and restore the family-supporting job as the centerpiece of the American economy. Continuing, the Judeo-Christian tradition, stretching back to Genesis, has always recognized fruitful work as integral to human dignity as service to God, neighbor, and family. While it is primarily the culture's responsibility to affirm the dignity of work, our federal labor and employment agencies have an important role to play by protecting workers, setting boundaries for the healthy functioning of labor markets, and ultimately encouraging wages and conditions for jobs that can support a family. Now, that all sounds really good, right? Here's what comes next. Sabbath, rest. Sabbath, rest. God ordained the Sabbath as a day of rest, and until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate. The Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of work on that day. So a few decades ago, those of us who've been around for a while, there was something called the Sunday Blue laws. Restricted certain aspects of buying and selling on Sundays. Moreover, a shared day off makes it possible for families and communities to enjoy time off together rather than as an atomized individuals, and provides a healthier cadence of life for everyone. Now, in principle, we would agree with that. Unfortunately, that communal day of rest has eroded under the pressures of consumerism and secularism, especially for low-income workers. We must have the NFL on Sunday, right? Congress should encourage communal rest by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to require that workers be paid time and a half for hours worked on the Sabbath. In other words, if you're going to have people work for you on Sabbath, you got to pay them time and a half. That would be a discouragement from employee expense. That day would default to Sunday, except for employers with a sincere religious observance of a Sabbath at a different time, such as Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. The obligation would transfer to that period instead. Now, I don't know the Jewish community all that well in the public profile of Jewish high-profile people, but I think this line is here because Washington knows Dr. Ben Carson. And Washington knows Wintley Phipps. And Washington knows Chaplain Barry Black, chaplain to the United States Senate. They know who these individuals are and what they stand for. Now, there's an alternative view. While some conservatives believe that the government should encourage certain religious observance by making it more expensive for employers and consumers to not partake in these observances, other conservatives believe that the government's role is to protect the free exercise of religion by eliminating barriers as opposed to erecting them. Whereas imposing overtime rules on the Sabbath would lead to higher costs and limited access to goods and services and reduced work available on Sabbath, while also incentivizing some people through higher wages to desire to work on Sabbath, the proper role of government in helping to enable individuals to practice their religion is to reduce barriers to work options and to fruitful employer and employee relations. The result? Ample job options that do not require work on the Sabbath, so that individuals in roles that sometimes do require Sabbath work are empowered to negotiate directly with their employer to achieve their desired schedule. So, we have Laudato Si and Laudato Deum, Sunday. Mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, and I am on your right, Sunday. I think every 4 years, the political commentators on the networks will say, "This is the most important election that we have ever had." Have you heard that before? You know, your memory? I think this could be the most important election we've ever had. The challenge is, who do you vote for? I'm glad you're listening. I'm not a prophet. I don't have the prophetic gift. But if a conservative wins in 2024, whoever that conservative might be, the left is going to go nuts. And if a liberal wins in 2024, the right is just going to get more and more desperate. Because the left is godless, and the right is desperate. So let's go left. There are many admirable things about the left. But do you really want to embrace partial birth abortion? Or even post-birth abortion? Do you really want to embrace the whole LGBT agenda? Do you really want to have drag queens telling stories in libraries? That comes with the left. If you embrace the right, do you really want to affirm that sense of corporate greed? And to have the idea that you have thrown your lot in with the wealthy who oppress the common person? And are you ready to line up with Sunday? I mean, what do you do? A few months ago, we provided some evidence that there's the thought that a pandemic is going to be coming in 2025. Remember that? That this one will be targeted more towards children. And if that doesn't grab you by the chest, I don't know what will. Now, is that just a projection that is lobbed out there to create hysteria, or is that reality? We don't know. But this we know, it's not going to get better. We may have a few weeks, we may have a quarter or two of better, but it's not going to get better. Fall Summit, you think you're at the top, but you're not. Do you have the drive to continue walking? Are you going to stop at Trailcrest? Are you going to stop at Trailcrest? Or are you going to turn and finish the final 2 miles and 900 feet to go to the top of Whitney? 1 Peter chapter 4, we read this. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. And Hebrews chapter 12 echoes what Peter wrote. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. My brothers and sisters, keep climbing. Stay on the trail. Do not lose focus. Watch, pray, and be ready.